This developer has had a massive impact. Aaron Swartz. When you think of Microsoft, you think of Bill Gates. When you think of Meta, you think of Zuck. Swartz wasn't focused on product. The reason his story is interesting is because it proves that you can make a name for yourself without designing products. Aaron Swartz is the fire stealer, and so we'll get into why that is. Software is full of artificial scarcity. A lot of business models are built on stealing your data and wrapping it in a bow. And we see this with AI especially. See reports of Google opting you into data sharing for their AI developments without even telling you. And we've seen this even before then with companies like Adobe. You end up in a case where you're paying for a subscription, and without you realizing it, the data that you're giving to them is trickling off into a more premium subscription typically. And they're laughing to the bank, right? They got your data and then they're selling it back to you. Aaron Swartz saw this as a critical threat. He refused to accept a web that was built by gatekeepers. He would go on to help build infrastructure that shaped the open web that we know today. And so we'll go into the various creations of Aaron Swartz, MD. This is just a small portion of what Aaron Swartz has accomplished in his life. So Swartz can really be compared to Prometheus. Prometheus defied Zeus and gave humans the ability of fire. Zeus had effectively become a gatekeeper. And a key part here, fire is nice, but if you only give it to us once, give a man a fish, he's full for a day. Give a man stolen data, he's full for a lifetime. Obviously this part's not, but giving somebody something means nothing if they can't do it themselves. Swartz had this mindset for information. Information is the modern day fire. With it, an individual can learn a new skill, gain awareness of alternatives, and then shackle themselves from curated ideas. And especially with the algorithmic internet, where moderation is forever rampant, especially with websites like Reddit, which oddly enough, Swartz had a hand in shaping early on anyway, the website that we know today and love, used to love anyway. And even outside of that, I think you know from your experience with using these apps, they really do have control over what you're seeing and what you're interacting with. They want to give you information that prioritizes the money and the time that you spend on their platform, and ideally feeding you content that you will consume well into the future. If you view data as fire, you can view the algorithm as the flint and steel, where every time they feed you a certain piece of content, they're figuring out, hey, what lights this fire? With every layer in the middle, it becomes an opportunity for confinement to take form. Swartz, much like Prometheus, did not believe in this middle layer confinement. As a teenager, Swartz made significant contributions also to RSS, which is a protocol that lets anyone syndicate content without a middleman. RSS has been around for a very long time. And actually, we're starting to see a lot of resurgence of RSS. Small scale, yes, but we are starting to see a bit of a resurgence there. And an RSS distributed blog ultimately belongs to the writer. The feed runs on the writer's own domain, the reader's relationship is direct, and there is no platform between them. If the writer changes hosts, the feed URL stays the same, and the readers do not notice. So with RSS, you really get an ability to track your favorite news sources, but without their middle layer that is determining what and when you see it. Right? Typical blog sites and media websites, they might give you this information in a very different way. In some cases, it won't even give it to you at all. But with RSS, you know for a fact, it's going to give it to you in the order that it comes in at. And this has a lot of benefits, right? There's a lot of information you could be missing due to the algorithms. While the RSS audience today is very small, it is extremely high quality. The people that are observing your content through RSS, as we mentioned, it's very structured. They're more likely to stick around and be diehard fans of you because they actually get to see it. If it's presented to you in this algorithmic way, you might miss some of these in-betweens. Whereas with RSS, they're guaranteed to see it at some point. I can't sit here and say that I haven't benefited from algorithms, but I think my own channel has benefited a lot. You would never have seen this video if it weren't for the algorithm. I also think there's a lot of creators and a lot of articles that I found through algorithms that have actually been a net positive. However, there are definitely arguments to be made about whether this is a form of a moderation. What stops them from controlling the type of stuff that comes into my algorithm? Ultimately, they hold the ingredients and the recipe of the algorithm. And kind of as we discussed earlier, with Zeus's main goal really being for us to rely on what they have, really this isn't too far from that, right? We're relying on them to feed us this information and we have less control over it. Swartz also worked on the architecture for Creative Commons. If you're not a creator, I'm sure you've heard of Creative Commons in some way. So the default copyright is all rights reserved. Creative Commons gives creators a standardized and free way to say that it is actually some rights reserved with clear conditions, especially with how fast the internet turned into a place where really you could share anything you want. Creative Commons was an essential part of this ability. And while Creative Commons did not invent free licensing, it solved the real issue here, which was in coordination. A lot of things that you know and love, think of your Khan Academies, your public writings from different institutions. A lot of that stuff is only available because they had an easy access to a Creative Commons. And of course, Swartz went on to help design Markdown, which is the plain text language that really is driving a significant portion of our software development process today. MD files are really the basis of a lot of our interactions with AI. We use it for skills, for instruction files, even for READMEs, right? We use it for pretty much anything that involves a human interfacing with the AI. And why the heck are we still using Markdown? And a key part, right? Plain text is beautiful. I can just show it to anybody. The syntax as legible as it gets, and it's easy to write even with no assists. Because of how simple it is, by nature, is more token efficient. And the simplicity of it allows us as human beings, even when we have very little experience in the language, to understand what's going on. You don't have to weed through paragraph tags and complicated structures. It's all very much in English language. By making the source itself human legible, it broke down the wall of confusion between plain notes and proper web content. You got to realize that a lot of people that see languages like HTML and CSS, if they have no coding experience, they basically view it as hieroglyphics. A lot of the benefits in Markdown, like we mentioned before, is in its simplicity. And the decision still echoes. Markdown became the default for README files, documentation, note-taking apps, and a primary way people talk to AI. It expands the scope of AI labs to non-devs. Right, think of the power that non-developers get to configure their LLMs through MD files. Right, they can go in and hand type an MD and see actual change happening. And so the same format that Swartz helped shape as a teenager is now the quiet backbone of how millions of people write code and think with machines. And Markdown isn't something you profit off of, right? As we were discussing before, this isn't a product. This is really infrastructure, right? It's the medium that people are using to communicate. And while on the surface, it's not as exciting as a product, and it may not give you this immediate pull, the reason we're still talking about Aaron Swartz today is largely because of things like MD. And so Swartz really treated code as a leverage. He didn't just write it, he took responsibility for everything it touched. Shipping apps can make you known for a product, but once that product dies, your name dies with it. Building the infrastructure cements a legacy that lasts beyond your time. Right? While you look at it on the surface, it may seem like building out infrastructure, it doesn't have an immediate large impact. But over time, as people are changing to it and it becomes more of a standard, that becomes the backbone for everything that we're doing. And so Swartz really proved that building better software means more than just shipping a new product. Sometimes it means stealing fire. Right? In a way, Markdown gave the layman access to development. Now, obviously, it's not a true coding language, but it is an interface to develop coding language through the LM. And so in that way, you can view it as a fire starter, much like the RSS and the Creative Commons stuff that he worked on in the past. Now, later in Swartz's career, due to his personality, right, he really did have an unbendable mission when it came to preventing cases like the middleman restricting our information, right? And in his mindset, you don't file a bug report, you simply refuse to comply. So towards the end of his run, he did eventually end up in a pickle. He plugged a laptop into an MIT network and started downloading millions of academic papers from JSTOR, and effectively he wrote a script to automate the downloads and set the data free. And so JSTOR is a digital repository that archives and disseminates online manuscripts, GIS systems, scanned plant specimens, and content from academic journal articles. And so ultimately, they threw the book at him. He faced possibility of decades in federal prison for unauthorized downloading and computer access. And really, they gave him a lot of opportunities to plea deals. But with the way that Swartz is, he was really against that. And so ultimately, he refused to accept that liberating information should make him a felon. And so sadly, Swartz did end up taking his own life before the trial could go through. He died very young, at the young age of 26. And it's worth noting that, in this scenario here, the legal trouble that Swartz got into, I think you need to view it from both sides. But I think while admirable on paper, there are some strong counterarguments where, hey, on one hand, the access to information is a fire, right? Kind of what we were discussing before. But on the other hand, you have to realize that the driving force of that flame is the monetary benefits that fund it. And so personally, I don't view what he did as a net positive. I think it was a little bit off. But at the same time, I can appreciate that he stuck to his mindset. A lot of what he developed was in this frame of mind. But I do think that there are some parts of this that I personally do not fully align with. But ultimately, regardless of how you view what he did there, you cannot undermine the contributions that he's made to software and the internet as a whole. And he is proof of somebody who built their name not by a product, but by building out infrastructure, right? These are the people we don't see and hear about right away, but as time goes on, these are the names that last.